والسلام على سيدنا المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Amma ba'd. My dear brothers, please come forward, complete the lines. Don't lean against the wall unless you have a physical disability. The khutbah is part of the salah, so you would not leave a gap in one, don't leave a gap in the other. Please come forward if you can. We thank Allah who has gathered and guided us here up to this very auspicious moment where we develop the deepest wisdom available to any man. And that is the wisdom to put our forehead on the ground in sajda to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. I bear witness and testify, if it is my last permitted act, that there is no one worthy of our worship, our praise, our devotion, and none who can guide us except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides, this person can never be misguided. Whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves to find his own devices and his own way, this person will never find the truth. Further, I testify that 1400 years ago, a man, a human being named Muhammad ibn Abdullah came to this earth and was the last final messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The book he was given, which we know today is the Holy Quran, is the final perfect revelation of God to man and is free of any deviation, any error, any departure from the truth. That's what follows. First, my brothers, I wish you, if I did not see you yesterday, I wish you an Eid Mubarak. Ramadan has successfully concluded, subhanallah, and those of us who had the privilege of living from the beginning to the end of this Ramadan have surely experienced the most auspicious event, which is the opportunity to have our sins forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to deny ourselves that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made lawful for us throughout the rest of the year. And as the scholars say, the fasting in 1 month of Ramadan has the same benefit as fasting 10 months in the year. The hasanah is 10 times. So it is that the scholars also recommend, if it is possible, we are now in the month of Shawwal, if you can fast 6 days in Shawwal, the blessing is like 60 days in Shawwal, which means if you fast 1 month in Ramadan and 6 days in Shawwal, it is as though you fasted the whole year. This is authentic hadith from Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we say again, if you can fast 6 days in the month of Shawwal, in addition to the month of Ramadan, the blessing for the month of Ramadan is like 10 months of fasting in the year. And the blessing for fasting 6 days in Shawwal is again like 60 days. So if you fast the 6 days in Shawwal, it is as though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you as though you fasted the entire year. So this is not compulsory, of course, but it is something that gives you an opportunity to get nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is really what I wanted to talk about today, was nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the ultimate goal in the creation of human freedom. You might say another way of talking about this is human freedom. But what the month of Ramadan should have taught us is as much of what we consider essential to the conduct of our life is in fact an illusion. You think you need food, you think you need water, you think you need large material goods, you think you need all these things in your life in order to make it complete. But in reality, the month of Ramadan shows you that you need none of those things in order to be truly happy. In fact, you can survive on much different things than it was that you thought you needed. And so the month of Ramadan reveals to you that what you think you need is in fact not what you need, and what you don't think about as much is in fact essential to the conduct of your life. And that is nearness to the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran talks about faith or religion, He always talks about this notion of sight. Do you have the ability to see? Now, what is He talking about? Is He saying that people could basically be blind if they don't have religious faith? In a manner of speaking, yes. Not physically blind, but morally blind. And so it is that when you hear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describe the disbelievers, those who actively reject faith, He uses the phrase, Summun bukmun humyun fahum la yarja'un, which means deaf, dumb, and blind are they. Now we all know that everybody who does not follow the ways of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not physically blind. So what does God mean by this? What He means by this is that you can see something, but if your heart and your mind are not aligned to the truth, even though you see something, what you see will have a different meaning to you than somebody else. So it is that 1 million people a day can walk by a man lying in a gutter on the street, and they pass by him and they see nothing. Maybe they see the body there, but it does not affect their heart. But a Muslim person who walks by this same scene asks himself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if there is anything that he can do to prevent this from occurring in the society. A Muslim person asks himself why it is, if everybody has wealth, that this one person is suffering and nobody does anything about it. Two people walk past the same person, they physically see the same thing, but the moral sight The moral blindness of the majority is different. And so it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that those people who develop faith, who develop closeness, who develop taqwa, look at the world and see the same things you and I see, but they see them in a different way. Because it is that Allah has enhanced their sight with knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. And that is why when the Holy Quran talks about this is the book in it, guidance sure without doubt, it doesn't say guidance sure without doubt for everybody. It says guidance sure without doubt for people who follow certain things, who believe in things they can't see, who pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who are charitable, who are kind. And so it is that even your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your senses do not have the same effect as they do if they are not associated with a desire to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, when God describes the rewards of paradise, yes, lesser people and people who wish to make cartoons of this religion talk about companions and rivers flowing and gold and pearls and all this kind of stuff. But if you read carefully, the Quran says that the greatest reward of paradise, the greatest reward of Jannah, is closeness to Him. The highest level of Jannah is the one in which we have closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so it is when we have true sight, when we have true faith, when we have true love for all the gifts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, the most satisfying thing in a Muslim's life is that he could be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That he would feel the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala coming to him, that he would feel the comfort of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala coming to him, that he would feel the satisfaction of knowing whatever happens to him in this life, it is by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it is causing him to get nearer to God. If a good thing happens, he says subhanallah, he feels nearer to God because God has rewarded him. If he has suffering or disease or trial or tribulation, he says subhanallah because it has made him more aware of his dependence on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so it is, whether good or bad happens to him, the Muslim is steady, even, unemotional, unaffected. Why? Not because bad things don't happen to him, not because he doesn't feel pain or sadness or loss, but because he is able to place those emotions and those feelings within the matrix of his relationship with Almighty Allah. And that is the difference between Islam and all other ways of life. That the true goal of the Muslim is not to wind up in paradise so that he has 72 virgins or whatever other nonsense is being spread about this deen, but rather that he would seek paradise because he would seek to bring his soul physically as close as possible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who created this soul. And in this he would find the deepest satisfaction that is available to any man. What the month of Ramadan gives us is the opportunity to see that that which is physical in this world pales in comparison to that which you cannot see, which is spiritual, which is your closeness and connection to the energy that created this entire universe, which is the energy of love and truth, which comes only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which we refer to as His nur and light. Why do I say this? I say this because I look around at the world today and I cannot help but feel, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala modify this within me, but I cannot help but feel a great anger. I feel a great anger because I see that Muslims have been the foremost among all people in distorting our own way of life. Muslims have been handed a gift greater than any gift that has been given to anybody else on earth. Greater than $1 billion, greater than good looks, greater than infinite eloquence, greater than the ability mentally to solve any problem. The gift we have been given is the gift of understanding God to the extent that He permits us to do so. And what we have done with this gift, rather than share it with the people or create a society based on it, or change and transform the quality of our own lives, what we have done with this gift is we put it in the corner. We put it in the corner and we hide it. And we chase baubles and trinkets and toys and things that have no meaning or no lasting satisfaction, even in this life, let alone in the next. And the world around us rots. The world around us rots. We come to this country and some among us are so lost that they say these people around us are kuffar. You know what kuffar means? Kuffar means someone who has rejected Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's teaching. In order to have kafara or rejection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to be presented with the deen in the first place. Think about this. How can I reject something which has not been presented to me in the first place? It's like I come to you and say, you have rejected $1 million. And you look at me and you say, brother, where did this come from? Who offered it to me in the first place? Kafar means that you reject something. The people in this country, most of them have never been presented this deen. And then you say, oh, somebody gave someone a Quran, or somebody gave somebody a book, or somebody yelled at somebody on a street corner to get out of his way because he had a 6-inch long beard when he was going to the mosque. This is not presentation of the deen, my brothers. This is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask you about on the Day of Judgment. If you take a Quran and give it to somebody, by all means, this is good. But if you slap him in the face, astaghfirullah, with this Quran, with no love in your heart, what kind of presentation is this? Our lives are here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought us here, and we have a choice. That choice is, first of all, we can set the people around us and ourselves free, because we can show them that there is another way to live, filled with love and truth and light, filled with compassion and kindness, justice and mercy. But if we live in this way, day in, day out, next to the people beside us, and they are exposed to 1,000 days of this, and then they say, I don't want to live like that, that is kafara. But I don't think, if you and I were honest with each other, that this is the way that we practice this deen. That this is the way that we engage with those people who don't believe it, let alone, or know about it, which is the larger group, let alone how we engage with each other and ourselves. If I were to translate what most people think about Islam, honestly, who are Muslim, honestly, based on what we see in terms of practice, we would say first that they would believe, yes, Islam has nice manners, nice way of dressing, nice way of talking to your elders and probably your children. You know, good that you pray and that you try not to cheat, lie, or steal. But in the end, you should do all of that and then try to get a good job, try to make a lot of money, try to have a big house, and this is sort of success in life. And so what has happened is Muslims slowly have lost the entire point of this deen. You know, when you see a dog walking in the street next to a person, the dog follows that person, because the dog is not equal to the person. And if a dog were to run away from a person, as his master, and go and follow another dog, it is possible that those two dogs together, they could live. It's true, they could. They could maybe steal food from the garbage. Maybe they could sleep outside when the rain comes down. But the dog is not going to talk to the other dog and say, okay, let's build a computer to schedule our meals. Or let's buy veterinary service in case one of us gets sick. Or let's adjust the light so that we are comfortable when we sleep. Because the dog was never really intended to follow another dog in order to obtain his true freedom. But when the dog is with a man in a family who loves him, then that dog has the comforts of life. He follows certain things. He doesn't bite strangers. He doesn't bite the mat, doesn't disobey him. But his life is very comfortable versus what it would be if he was left to his own devices in the wild. The dog was not meant to follow another dog, because if he does that, his life is filled with suffering that he doesn't need. Now we come to the notion of man. Most of the brothers in this world, unfortunately, they have given up their manhood. They have given up the idea that the one they should follow is one greater than themselves, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Instead, like the dog who follows another dog, astaghfirullah, I'm not saying Muslims are dogs or humans are dogs. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, it is just as unnatural for a man to declare another man his God as it is for a dog to follow another dog. One cannot follow what is already equal to one in the first place. This is unnatural. And when one does that, one is lost. Just like the dog who is outside in the winter and has no benefit of central heating, which he could never design on his own, so it is that when a man says that another man will dictate what is right, what is wrong, what is comfortable, what is not, when a man surrenders his own process of independent thinking and sight and says other men will tell him how he should live and what is successful and all of this sort of stuff, then that man becomes lost. And so what has happened to Islam is that we have allowed Islam to be defined by people other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in defining ourselves other than by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked us for, we suffer. We suffer every day in every way. And we lose the benefit of being close to Him. And this is what has happened to us. So it is, I'll give you several examples. So it is that Muslim people always complain that yes, we are poor, even in this city. Even in this city, they will say there are many places where Muslim people are in poverty or using food banks. And this is true. It is also true that there are at least 100,000 Muslim families that have at least $10,000 in savings, in fact much more than this. And so it is equally true that the Muslim community in Toronto alone, I'm not talking about Saudi Arabia or Lebanon or Qatar or any other place like that. I'm saying the Muslim community here in Toronto alone has over $1 billion in assets here in Toronto. $1 billion. And Muslims everywhere are poor here in this city, working terrible jobs for long hours, low wages, and ill treatment. But the Muslim community itself, not the government of Canada, not the white man, who some people try to blame for all our problems, none of that. The Muslim community itself here in this city, I'm not even talking all of Canada, has over $1 billion in resources, assets that could be available to be spent. So do we really think we're poor? Is this really the problem? Or is the problem the way we see? Because everybody says on his own, oh, this is my money, and this is some other brother's money, and this is some other... And God forbid I ever talk to other brothers and say, what could we do together to make ourselves better and to make the community better? So you have $1 billion in Toronto, in this town that if you wanted to, you could walk from one end of to the other end of within maybe a week. And within this town, that money is useless to yourself and to the community. And it has been this way for 35 years, more than that. And you know why? Because we don't see. We walk by each other, we see a brother as a doctor, a brother as a lawyer, a brother as a businessman. And the man who is the businessman says, oh, the brother who is a doctor, he has good wages, but he has no time to let his money earn income because he only works by himself. I have a business, I could expand my business, I could take some of his money and give him a return when he's sleeping, so he doesn't have to work so often for money. Maybe he could spend some of his time working for free with the poor, because his financial freedom is set. We look at a doctor, we don't see someone who is in financial trouble, because he's a doctor. Again, we have eyes, but we don't see. We don't talk to him. We say, brother has a good salary, he has a job in a company, but then we say, wait a minute, maybe he is afraid constantly every few weeks of losing his job. It happens all the time. So what can we do to see that that brother who we think of as successful has security? We walk by, we see a brother standing in a parking lot, 12 hours a day for $9 an hour. That fellow takes our ticket, he punches it. And we say, what could we do so this brother doesn't have to stand in the hot sun and fast in the month of Ramadan with no water, no food, nothing, probably work his shift through his iftari, maybe even his sahur. But we look at this brother, we see him with our eyes, he's standing there, but we don't see. And so it is that in ignoring all of this, we miss out on the greatest pleasure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give a man. And that is the pleasure of nearness to him. Because if we had a community where we truly saw, where the purpose of our community was everyone to come together, so that all of us were closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at that point, that man would not be working in that parking lot for more than 6 months. That doctor would not be working 25 years trying to bill every 15 minutes so that he could make a living. The businessman would not only have his own family's money in his business, he would be supporting the community with the excess of what it was he generated. The teacher would not only be making money working in the school, the teacher would be spending time educating so that nobody was illiterate in our society. And on and on and on I go. Why doesn't this happen? Is it because of a lack of money? Please. Is it because we need the Saudis or the Egyptians or the Qataris or somebody else with oil wealth to come here and save us? No. It's not. And it never was. It never was. The problem with Islam is Muslim people. The point of Islam is to set man free. I know this is a hard khutbah. You fasted for 30 days and you say to yourself, Ya Allah, what else do you want me to do? But that's only because you're comparing yourself to people who don't fast at all. So if you're walking in the jungle and one man has no light and is completely lost, it doesn't mean that you have a sense of direction because you can see one tree ahead. If you've been on a superhighway and you can drive at 200 kilometers an hour, then you know what a sense of direction is. And that is the comparison between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way and the way of man following in his own direction. You see, we have bought into this idea that freedom is a physical thing. That if you have a couple of cars, maybe a large house, lots of nice toys, and more food to eat than your body really needs, now you're free. And the Western man has peddled this to other Western people so they don't ask too many other questions. Because the greatest trick ever pulled by bad people is to convince good people that they don't count. That is the greatest trick ever pulled. And so if everybody is satisfied with a couple of meals and a roof over his head and a few toys and maybe a pretty girl as a wife, if this is what satisfaction is to you, then you stop asking questions. You stop asking about what the situation is of the weakest of you and what you were truly put on this earth to do. Because I'll tell you something, an animal can achieve that definition of satisfaction. A dog, a cat, a mouse, they can live their entire lives eating a couple of times meals, getting shelter, mating with whatever is considered attractive by another animal. This is satisfaction at an animal level. This is not the satisfaction of a man. Man was designed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be his representative, his khalifa on earth. Man was bowed to by the angels who don't commit sin. Because man had the ability given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of understanding. And this understanding was supposed to create love. And this love was supposed to create devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Cooperation. So it is that a small boy 6 years old could kill the biggest lion or elephant on earth because other men who he never met cooperated and showed him how to build a gun. So it is that man can overcome his limited physical abilities because of his unlimited spiritual abilities which are granted to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Man is not free because he lives like an animal with a slightly heavier brain. Man is free because he sheds the animal within himself to nurture his soul. And his soul has a yearning to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His soul says that my body may be big or small. I may be man or woman. I may be black or white. I may be brown or green. I may be rich or poor. I may be intelligent or eloquent or kind. It doesn't matter. All of this is like a package. And inside that package is the truth. And the truth is, was I good or was I not? And this is the only question that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask you. He won't ask you if you were 6'5" or if you couldn't walk. He won't ask you what your balance sheet looked like or your bank account. He will ask you only, what did you do with what I gave you? And were you on the side of right? And the moment you realize this, the moment then you are truly free. Because then all the garbage and nonsense that everyone is constantly trying to push at you, to take control of your mind, to tell you got to work a certain way, or you got to seek the approval of people who don't care about you, or you got to dress in a certain fashion, or you got to kill yourself to distance yourself from your family while chasing money that you don't even have or need. All of that is gone. And instead, the only question that burns through your brain morning, noon, and night is, how do I get closer to God? There's a sports executive who came into town, and he asks all of his employees, he was very successful, what are we doing today to win a championship? Great question. The Muslim asks himself the same question, except it's, what are we doing today to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Human freedom is not that you have more toys than the next guy. It's not that you ate a bigger meal than the next guy. Human freedom is the fact that you acknowledge that being human is special and unique. That all the things that other people tell you pale in comparison to what God could give you. That your life is measured not by what you took for yourself, but by what you sacrificed for others. That success is measured not just by what you had, but by the condition of the weakest of your brothers in Islam and your brothers in humanity. And if this definition of freedom is in your head, freedom for all, not just freedom for one. Justice for all, not just justice for one. Knowledge for all, not just knowledge for one. If this is what drives you, you will find other brothers who feel this way, and you will experience a love, connection, and sense of clarity about your life that is true sight. This is the promise of the Quran, this is the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is the example of the finest human being who ever lived, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who built a society that within 20 years of his death had no need for the zakat, even though it was collected. Nobody to give it to, because every individual family and person was on the lookout for the person beside him. And this is the success in life that we are exposed to. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us guidance, wisdom, mercy, and the ability to grant nearness to Him on the Day of Judgment. My brothers, faith is not difficult in the sense that to understand. Faith is simple, but faith is not always easy. The reason it is simple but not always easy is that man is always distracted and always outnumbered by people who would wish to tell him that his life doesn't matter. It's hard to have standards in your life because it's easy to know when you violated them. If you live a life where you don't measure anything, then it's easy to say that you were successful, because you're not being held to any kind of standard or account. But if you say to yourself, no, I am going to measure myself every day, it's a simple task, but it's hard. Because every night you look at yourself and say, wow, did I lose my temper? Was I abrupt with this brother? Did I set the correct example for my wife and my kids? Did I give enough time to those people who needed it from me? How was I in terms of taking the things God gave me and putting them out into the community? Do I even know who the community is? Do I know my brothers? Let alone did I give anything to them? So faith is simple, but faith can be hard. It can be hard because we distract ourselves with all the things that don't matter. Islam was put into this world as the final revelation of God to man to clear out the things that don't matter, to show people what a society could look like that was focused on the things that matter. There is no reason for anyone in this country or any other country in the world to go to bed hungry at night. There is no reason for millions and millions of people with diseases to have them. There is no reason for anyone not to be able to read. There is no reason for anyone to be poor. People tell you these things and they say, oh brother, you're talking in fantasies and dreams. Life is made by dreams that will not die and people who are willing to fulfill them. This deen was spread by people who had a dream, who stood in the middle of the desert with very little water and food coming to them, who said the whole world was going to change because of a dream that they had. Now the dream came to them from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but because it wasn't real, it required belief and faith and effort and cooperation and sight and clarity to see what is there. Too many brothers, they look out at this world and they have hatred in their hearts towards non-Muslim people. They may not think it that way, but they use words like kuffar or lost or non-believer, or they throw their nose up in the air at those people who are not Muslim. Don't do that, brothers. Don't do that. Because one day Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask you what it was about your life that caused these people to want to become closer to Him. And I fear the day when myself and you are asked that question, if this society remains the way that it is. If there are still people, Muslim and non-Muslim, in this society who are poor, I fear the day when those of us who had money were asked what we did. If there are people that never got a chance to learn how to read or use a computer or function in this particular society, I fear the day when those of us who know how this country works would be asked what we did for them. I fear the day when women are asked how the men in their lives treated them, whether they gave them an example, and whether the goal of every woman who grew up in a Muslim household was to marry a Muslim man. Because I can tell you, if we're honest, it isn't, because of the way that they see their parents treating each other and the way they see their fathers treating their daughters. If every child grew up saying, well, I wish my parents were Muslim, because it isn't the way that the Muslim parents are treating the non-Muslim people, their own children these days. Let us all fear the day when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would hold us to account for the most valuable gift He has ever given us. And that is the gift of sight, the gift of deen, the gift of love, and most of all the gift of human freedom. I say Eid Mubarak to you with love and affection in my heart, because you're all the finest people I would ever have the chance to know. It is an honor to speak among you, and an honor I do not deserve. But I tell myself and then I tell you, brothers, the clock is running. The clock is running on all of us. The clock is running on all of us, and we're running out of time in our own lives. Many of us will not know if we will make it to next Ramadan. And this deen is about more than a series of rituals and living life like an animal with a heavier brain. This deen is creating an example of God's mercy for people who don't see it. An example of God's mercy for people who don't know it's there. An example of God's love for people who don't know it's the only thing that matters. You have been given the opportunity to clear your mind of distractions and to be truly free. And you cannot walk past other people in cages and ignore their condition. This is the message of this deen. This is why we are Muslims, and this is what I wanted to remind you of, and myself foremost and then you in this khutbah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us.